Here's the Opposition Leader, Peter Dutton.
I hope they have a great Australia Day tomorrow and an opportunity to spend time with friends and family, and it's a wonderful day that our country celebrates. So I'm sure that many people have got barbecues planned and watching cricket and many other pastimes, and that is a great thing. I also want to obviously mention for those people in North Queensland who are in the eye of the cyclone that will support the government in whatever measure they decide to put in place to give support and the prepositioning of the assets, the ability to respond to incidents, that's critically important. So support both the state government and the federal government in relation to their activities to make sure that they prepare for what looks to be a very significant weather event, either a cyclone or a significant rain event. So our thoughts, our prayers are with those people in North Queensland, far North Queensland at the moment, and we'll see how that plays out over the next couple of days. Well, the Prime Minister said to Australians today that he'd been listening to them over the course of Christmas and that he'd been to each state and territory. But the reality is, if the Prime Minister hadn't been preoccupied over the course of the last 18 months, he would have been out, as we've been out, to every state and territory, right across the country, talking to Australians, to families, to small businesses, who have had a consistent message, and that is that they have been finding it very difficult to balance their budget. They can't manage the cost of living pressures under the Albanese government. They can't afford the extra $24,000 a year that they're paying on their mortgage. People have been saying that now, Prime Minister, for 18 months, and the Prime Minister has done nothing about it. In fact, in 2 budgets, the Prime Minister had the opportunity to help Australian families to reduce the cost of living, and instead he spent $450 million on The Voice. He was distracted by every other issue. He hasn't put in place measures which have helped Australians, but he has made decisions which have hurt Australians. And I think Australians expect from their Prime Minister an honourable approach to the way in which the Prime Minister engages with the Australian public, somebody who is straightforward, honest with them. People voted in their millions for the Labor Party, believing that they were going to get tax cuts to help them with their cost of living pressures, and as it turns out, that is not the case. The Prime Minister has knowingly and willingly lied to the Australian people, and I don't think the Australian people will easily forget or forgive. The Prime Minister today was misleading in his press club presentation. It turns out that, and this was not mentioned in his speech, that over the course of the next 10 years, the government will actually increase their tax take by $28 billion because of bracket creep. And everybody knows that as you work harder, you work longer, the longer you're in the workforce, the older you get, promotions at work, etc. As you work your way up through the income levels, you are paying more and more, and the tax department is collecting more and more because of bracket creep. And the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 tax policies were designed to help millions of Australians. We know that over the course of the next few years, it won't be 1.8 million people who are affected adversely by the Prime Minister's change. It will be something like 4 million Australians. And those aspirational young Australians, people who are working hard now for their retirement, to provide support to their kids, their families who are going to be hit hardest by the Albanese government's lie. And I think at the moment the Australian Prime Minister owes an apology to the Australian public, but he hasn't given it. Now, the other point that's worth making, I think, is that the Prime Minister had 18 months to try and put in place changes within the tax system or support around energy payments, etc., etc. He didn't do that, as I say, because he was distracted for 12 months by The Voice and the waste of $450 million. But he's also taken decisions which I think make it harder for Australians, and I think the Prime Minister owns all of those decisions now. We also know that the Dunkley by-election is on March 2. Now, people couldn't work out why there was a delay in announcing the date for the Dunkley by-election, but it was obviously done so that the Prime Minister could get a couple of sitting weeks in before people go to the polls in Dunkley on March the 2nd. I think the Prime Minister's looked at the polling, as I have, in relation to Dunkley, and I think he's quite shocked by what he's found. Let's call it and be honest about the Prime Minister's motivations here. His motivation is not to help people with cost of living pressures. He's had 18 months to do that. His motivation here is to shore up his own position and his own leadership. Because as we saw with Julia Gillard, when people look the Australian people in the eye and lie to them as a Prime Minister, people don't forget or forgive that. And how could you trust anything this Prime Minister says as a result? So I think he's looked at the polling for Dunkley. I think he's recognised that there are people on lower and middle incomes in Dunkley, and that this model, that his change that he's proposed today, is front and centre to trying to win political opportunity for the Labor Party in Dunkley. That's what it's about. And these changes, as they're proposed, don't come in until the 1st of July. The Prime Minister's got 5-6 months for the legislation to be passed. But instead, he wants to ram this bill through the Parliament before March 2, the Dunkley by-election, because he wants to try and wedge the coalition. That's his motivation. He's been in Parliament 26 years. He is a smart political operator, but he's now also a liar. And the Australian public know that he's not motivated to help them, he's motivated to help himself. And I think the Prime Minister is in all sorts of trouble. I think he's panicked. I think he's worried about his own position as leader within the Labor Party. And as we saw with Julia Gillard, this is a slippery slope, because I think Jim Chalmers and Bill Shorten have set the Prime Minister up for a massive fall. I think his leadership is terminal. And I think if the Prime Minister has a very significant change to make, and that he wants to renege on an election commitment he's taken to the last 2 elections, I think he should call an election and put the change position to the Australian people and let them be a judge of his character, whether he's fit to be Prime Minister of this country, whether they could ever trust him again. And I'd say to the people of Dunkley and to the broader Australian people, if this Prime Minister is prepared to look your neighbour in the eye and lie to him or her, you are next. The Prime Minister has a huge credibility problem. He's trashed his reputation for short-term political gain. I don't think Bill Shorten and Tanya Plibersek and Jim Chalmers and others are going to let the public forget that. And I hope that the Prime Minister can apologise for the lie that he has perpetrated here. But it was obvious today that he's got no intention of doing that. I'm happy to take any questions.
Jim Chalmers spent most of his time as Treasurer since being sworn in, warning about the dangers of inflation and the impacts of those dangers on the cost of living. And within a month of inflation seemingly being stabilised, this is announced, and Jim Chalmers is quoting what he always described as the independent Reserve Bank, saying the inflationary impacts will be minimal, if not non-existent, despite all the misgivings expressed by the Governor's predecessor, Mr Lowe. Who does the public believe?
Well, Adam, I watched the Prime Minister's presentation today. I thought it was a ramble, to be honest, particularly the Q&A session. But what it demonstrated was, firstly, the Prime Minister confirmed today that if the economic circumstances change, so will his position in relation to these tax cuts. So I don't think the people of Dunkley or Australians have any assurance that if they vote for the Labor Party on March 2, or they vote for the Labor Party whenever the general election is, that these tax cuts promised today would survive the election. So how do you trust a bloke who's gone to 2 elections telling you that his word is his bond and that he has made a solemn promise to the Australian public, repeated 100 times, and then walk away from it, and without justification? Because, again, as you rightly point out, the representation of Treasury and the Reserve Bank today is not accurate, and it's not complete, and that's why we've got 1,000 questions to ask. There are more questions out of the Prime Minister's speech today than answers, and I think we've got to understand, what does the Prime Minister mean when he says that COVID has an impact? He knew about COVID. He knew about the impacts. He's seen the economic predictions now in 2 budgets. He promised the Australian public on 97 occasions that he would reduce power prices by $275. He didn't do it. He promised the Australian public that he would provide the detail around the voice. He didn't do it. It was deceptive and tricky. And now he's taken it to the next level, and I think he's destroyed his leadership. And I think the Australian public at the moment are really despairing about who really is the true Anthony Albanese, because at the moment we're seeing a political charlatan who's prepared to do or say anything. And all I'd say, with a judgment that you're about to make about Anthony Albanese, look at what he says and contrast that with what he actually does, because he's not a truthful person.
You're saying that the, sorry.
That's right. Given the cost of living crisis, what is wrong with giving lower income earners a bigger tax cut?
Well, the Liberal Party is the party of lower taxes, and we've demonstrated that. I mean, we dragged the Labor Party kicking and screaming to support stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Stage 1 and 2 were targeted at people on lower and middle incomes. And stage 3 was also about providing support to people with aspiration as well, people who are in households at the moment where they're paying $24,000 or more extra for their mortgage under this Labor government. And so, of course, we support Australians and we support those who work hard so that they can keep more of their money. But when the Prime Minister came in to office, to this point now, we know that Australians are paying 27% more tax than when the Prime Minister was elected in May of 22. So again, I just think you've got to look past the rhetoric and the lies and the reality of people's lives. $15 a week is not going to cut it for families who continue to pay more and more for their energy bills under Labor. $15 a week isn't going to cut it when you're paying $15,000 or $25,000 a year more in your mortgage repayments under this government.